All right, so hello, Mr. Oliver. This will be sprint update number two for the 2 week period of 6/7 to 6/21. I'm going to try something a little bit different. You wanted a little bit more show and tell with this time, so I've got some recording software where I can do some screen sharing and kind of talk through some of the documents and stuff that I have. So I'm going to switch over to that right now. All right, let's see. Should be good. Looks like it. All right. So this is my actual sprint update document. Kind of walk through that, talk about some of those things, and then I'll show you some of the documentation and stuff that I've got. Went with the same format as I did last time. My currently working on right now, I've got my rough draft for my layer one of my physical topology for the campus sites. It's basically what I sent you with some minor tweaks based around kind of the feedback that you gave me, splitting the edge routers into two separate units, pulling from a separate internet source with that. And then I haven't fully fleshed out the WAN side of things, but I'm thinking that for redundancy, I may do some of the backup stuff run through over the internet. I need to do some further research on that though. Let's see, I'm working on a layer two breakdown, how I'm going to set up the VLANs for traffic routing from a layer two standpoint. So I've started kind of sketching that out, and we'll have that firmed up within the next couple of days. So I did shift, I don't know if I mentioned this in the email that I sent or not, but I have shifted to doing a single template for all three locations, and I'm going to just basically duplicate for each of the three. I think that that will be, it will make it a little easier to design, but also I think it will help to accommodate some of the redundancy issues that you wanted us to have covered. I think if I have a server located at each site, then that's going to provide that kind of fail-safe in case there is any issues. Um, my plan is to have those inter-networked such that they're feeding each other updates on a somewhat regular basis and staying current as far as that's concerned. Um, I think it'll be pretty easy to do this because the actual software that I found and I think talked to you about has a template for a distributed server system. Um, I'm not entirely sure whether I went over this with you or not. I feel like I did, but I'll talk a little bit about this. I found some technical specification documents specific to um, some software that the NOAA is actually using. So with that, they have a template for a distributed server system. So I'll be using that. Um, I also think that I'll probably be doing it locally as well as from campus to campus. So having virtually redundant servers that are stacked together and then having one of those at each of the locations. Um, I have put together my tech spec document and have that formatted out the way that I'd like it. I had space to add sections if I need them, but I think I have the core of that done. I used kind of the list that you provided and made some minor modifications, but for the most part, it is true to form for that. Um, I think that, like I said here, I think I've pretty much established what the specific needs for the servers are based off of the information that I have as far as performance level and storage requirements. I'm probably going to push it a little bit past, particularly from a storage perspective, what the actual NOAA specifications are. But I'm kind of using that as the starting point and then build off of that. Let's see. Lucidchart I've started getting into, and right now I'm in the process kind of learning how to use that by building out um, a layer one topographical diagram of the campus land structure. So I'll have that put together, and then my thought is that I can also kind of use that as a template for other layers. So for laying over top of that, some of the layer two topology, and then I can even chunk off smaller parts of that and then expand on that. So talking about like where the servers themselves are connecting to that dedicated server switch, and kind of addressing again what you were talking about of using dual dual interfaces for each of those different sections, whether it be management, et cetera. So I'll be able to kind of break that down and then use that for getting the documentation that we need for that. So that's pretty much what I was currently working on in the last little bit. Additionally, I've also just been kind of doing research into some of the different topics right now. I'm trying to figure out the setting up a VM stack. That's something I don't really know anything about, and kind of mention that here in challenges and upcoming items. My next big step, I feel like, is that I need to, within this week, get that built out and have it set up. I can do the heartbeat link tests that you want or verification for that, and then also have that structured such that I can use it for some of the test cases that I'll be running a little bit later on. I initially was not expecting, or I guess I shouldn't say that I was expecting, but I didn't realize that this was as big of a section of this project. I probably would have jumped into it a little bit sooner. And I kind of thought it was more of an ancillary portion of what we're putting together, but it does seem like building out this cluster is going to take a little bit of time and definitely some research and kind of getting figured out. So that's like my next big chunk that I'm going to be working on through the first half of this week, and intention is to have that basically where I want it by end of week. I kind of mentioned that here. Also talk about how through that email kind of is what clued me in on the fact that I was going to need to focus on this a little bit more. Got some instructional videos that I've set aside and plan to go through and working with that. As far as challenges in general, not too much different from what I indicated on the first one. The struggle for me right now is breaking this apart, kind of chunking it up into smaller pieces. So much of this project at this point has just been, I think I even say in here, kind of feels like the analogy of being dumped into a pool with a couple cinder blocks tied around my neck, as far as being plunged into a lot of stuff that I'm not familiar with, which seems to be by intent. And so up to this point, I think I've been doing a lot of just kind of trying to gain some knowledge, do some research, studying, but where we're at now, starting into Sprint 3, I need to kind of move past that and start working on actually fleshing out some of these different aspects. So that's going to be my focus over the next sprint for sure. Let's see. Kind of mentioned that here. It's obviously, like I say here, the project has become more complex, and so I still feel a little in over my head, but persevering through that regardless. Speaking specifically here, talking about kind of the remaining time that I have, some of my specific goals for those next two sprints. Complete the VM stack by the end of this week. That's the big one. Also, I'm going to start kind of fleshing out some of the land structure in GNS3. I think I'll do it in some smaller chunks that I can then merge together if I need to. But being sensitive to my computer's abilities, I'm going to try and keep it on the small end, and just enough to be able to run some tests. And then if I need to expand on that, I'll kind of cross that bridge when I get there. As far as my overall goal for this sprint as a whole, VM stacks and that kind of stuff set up by that first week. And then by the second week, I want to kind of have this working set up and have the pieces put together such that I can spend that fourth sprint doing my test cases. I think in concert, I will probably also start like sketching out some of the ideas of what those test cases are going to look like. But a lot of that is going to be predicated on what I'm able to get built out, both for the VM stack and in Genus 3. So that's kind of where I'm at as far as plans and goals. And then also just to continue to be diligent to be updating and adding to that tech spec doc. I feel like I've got it set up. I got that going early part of this or last week where I felt like it was in a good spot. And then I've had a couple of updates since, probably another one tonight as well. Let's see. And then what I kind of identify right now as my biggest issue is going to be figuring out the WAN solution, but I'm not going to put too much resources and time into that until I kind of knock out some of these other goals that I have. And then that'll be something that I'll work on a little bit later on, once I've got kind of more of the LAN and campus specific stuff oriented, and then build off of that for WAN solution. My expectation is that I will be keeping that relatively simple using leased lines, and then potentially, like I mentioned earlier, maybe some sort of failover onto some like internet provider based stuff. But that's a lot of speculation on my part, and it's going to require some further research. To address the next point, pieces for the final tech spec that I'm working on right now. I've got that framework for that document put together, and I like the way that it's set up. I took a template and reformatted it, so I think from the perspective of having something that once I turn it as a finished product, it's actually it'll look clean and professional. I've been adding mostly like reference material, editing the glossary. As soon as I start getting to that usage chart stuff put together, I'll start folding that in as well. I'll have, once I firm up some of that layer 2 structure, I'll get that put together. And then obviously, then you get addressing schemes and that kind of stuff. As I come up with that, we'll get headed in. Only aspect that I am carrying over from a Trello perspective is the bullet for defining bandwidth requirements between sites. I have kind of some rough numbers based off of what I've seen from the technical specifications that I got through NOAA. And I'm going to just continue to build off of that. A lot of that, I think, will be predicated on how the VM cluster and the LAN develop. But I kind of have some general ideas. As far as lessons learned so far, I found the stuff, the research that we did on SD-WAN really interesting. And I imagine that the SDN stuff will be the same. I definitely see a lot of that technology as kind of being the future for network management, as they indicate. It's something that I think is really interesting, the concept of incorporating automation. I particularly thought the way that the SD-WAN product is able to utilize multiple streams for WAN, so using even like 4G and BLS, standard internet, and dividing and splitting traffic across those to reduce, kind of dedicated lease line bandwidth, but then also to have some of that redundancy it's really fascinating. It's pretty cool. I'd definitely like to do a little more research into that and find some more information about that. I see that as something that will obviously become more and more prevalent as we go forward. So that was really interesting. As far as kind of more specific to the project, um, and I kind of talked about this earlier, but this concept of taking something like this and breaking it down in chunks is definitely not a strong suit for me. So I'm learning kind of how to do that. There's been some definite trial and error, but I think um, starting to get better at using Trello. I think I am on a good path now that I have that tech spec document put together that I can make sure I'm doing regular updates to that and frequent revisions. So I feel like I'm getting better at it. I definitely am not where I would like to be, but I mean, it's just part of the byproduct of working on a project like this individually as opposed to on a team. You know, there are other things that I would consider a strong suit on my end, and this is definitely not one of those. So we'll just continue to work on it. I think that wraps up this. I'll go over Trello, although I do have the clips in there that you'd like, so we can do that next. Um, Trello, I imagine you've seen this. I have my things to do. I also just kind of have my broad research topics, which I've been adding things into and pulling some things out as I feel like I've answered. But a lot of those are just kind of like, this is a topic I need to research. Things to do right now is somewhat gutted because I pulled a lot of that into the doing section. Um, I have, all my place cards for the different use cases that I'm going to try and put together. Um, and then like the CPU issues with GNS3, potentially some of that will end up being something that I work on in this next sprint. Um, if I'm utilizing GNS3 a lot more, we'll kind of see that. I'm hopeful that that may work itself out as I work through the software itself. As far as what I've got lined up for this sprint, the defining bandwidths, that kind of stuff I talked about. Obviously, what I'm doing now, which is doing the sprint update and uploading this video, will get moved over to sprint 2 once I'm done. Matter of fact, I'll do that now. Going to do the quiz, that SDN videos and essay. Try and get an addressing scheme set up for the campus LAN for each of those. I'm going to do that topology that I mentioned, set up VMware server and build out the cluster. I think that's a subnode on this maybe. Define my layer true structures for the campus LAN. That's kind of that VLAN breakdown. How am I going to compartmentalize traffic and set up security in that regard. All part of that will be answering this question: what specific things do I need at the campus outside of the actual just access of the server and the AWAPS software? Once I've got that lucid chart, put that into my my tech spec document, put the addressing stuff into there. I'm going to try and do a little research on SDN once I've gone through the information videos and written that paper. Probably start doing some research on some open source SDN so that I can start using that and figuring out how I'm going to configure that to manage the local network. George, one of our classmates posted, I think yesterday evening, a lab that he had found through VMware for setting up a vSAN. So that will be pretty integral in my setting up that VMware server and getting all that set up. I've got a little note here for a VMware account, which he said is going to be a part of that or required for that. So that's kind of where I'm at for Trello. I pulled this up again. I can't remember if I sent this to you or not, but this is the specifications that I found. Some of this is just kind of arbitrary. They're supercomputers operating off of the computing capacity that they have. Obviously, this is not going to be at that level. AWIPS is their thin client that they is open source. I'm working with the assumption that this is what would be used on that college campus. And from what I can gather, it is actually very often the case. So Cave is actually the thin version of AWIPS, which is the stuff that was developed specifically for NOAA. This runs off of a Linux system. It'll either run off of CentOS or Red Hat. It's will on the client machine will require 4 gigs NVIDIA driver and then about 2 gigs of space. The edX server is going to be the server system that'll be running off of. That's going to require also CentOS or Red Hat. Says recommended 16 plus CPU cores. So that'll be that physical machine that that server is going to be put on, I feel like. Maybe doubling that. It said a minimum of 24 gigs of RAM, but obviously more is better. And then 700 gig plus solid state drive is highly recommended. So I'm thinking at a minimum doubling that. But doubling may be sufficient if I have redundancy across the systems and also if I do this distributed system. I have another document that has a little bit more detail on this. There's actually some installation guides for each of these different pieces. But this distributed edX is probably what I'm going to end up doing. And then I'll use the, or load in additionally this local data manager, which is the server portion that is serving information off the edX to that client Caves program. And then linked to where I found all that. Just a quick scroll through on the tech deck or tech spec document. I will attach this, I guess, to my update. I don't know if you want a copy of that, but I'll put it on there just so that you have to flip through. A couple of revision histories from a formatting standpoint, table of contents. This one is actually pretty slick. I need to re-update it, but it has clickable links for the index that is automatically updating, which is pretty cool. Got an introduction, little executive summary, talk about the intended authors. I've not put in the major assumptions, but that'll be something I'll be putting in pretty soon. Section to put in actual schematics, and then sections for my use cases, and then behind that, my test cases, and there's space to add in more as I continue to add those. We'll have results for each of those and be able to talk about those. My installation procedures, once I've got everything to find out, actual instructions on how to set up and install, software configuration, some stuff about scalability. So basically just talking about how everything's broken up into modules, which you talked about. Talk about specific hardware and software needs. And then my appendix, I've got that with some pertinent terms in there, glossary here, and then references here. Has this issues thing, which I don't know if I'm going to hold on to or not. I feel like it makes more sense if you're working in a group so that you can relay those issues to other members of the team, but it may be worthwhile to put that in there because it could be something that could be referenced for a network manager down the road. So yeah, that's kind of what I've got right now. And yeah, that's the update. I do think that this next week's going to be pretty important. I've got to get a lot of stuff kind of fleshed out and put together such that I can start working towards setting up and running some of these test cases, probably most likely in Sprint 4, but potentially a little bit at the end of Sprint 3. Realistically, Sprint 3, end of Sprint 3, any test case stuff will maybe be more along the lines of kind of jotting out and figuring out what those are. So hopefully this worked well for you. I know you wanted to see a little more show and tell and kind of be able to have some information to give feedback on. So hopefully that'll provide that for you. And I cut off because I'm at about 25 minutes now. So that's like plenty of me talking. Have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.